Hello. One of the problems that we've had in the last few days, or in the last few years, is we simply haven't listened when Russia or when Putin has spoken. And the other day, he was asked in one of these TV meetings, he was asked, can a good country go to war? And he said, of course. And this is something. This is something that that Churchill would have agreed with. But instead, we are pussyfooting. We think we go to war. We think we send troops to support a NATO ally. That alliance is our baseline. Our baseline actually should be the basic morality of what is right and what is wrong. And however we approach or however we look at what Putin is doing in Russia now, even people on the street in Moscow cannot say this is right, and do not, but they get arrested if they protest. Putin rounded up a whole pile of protesters yesterday. We've got people protesting outside Russian embassies all the way across Europe. What is the point? What is the point? Because this isn't a display of democracy. And Putin is not listening to anyone. He's got his war chest. He's holed up in the Kremlin. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's known for some time. And like Hitler, he'd already spelled out his own plan. He'd spelled out his own plan. There's nothing that should surprise us in his attack on the Ukraine. More than that, there should be nothing that should surprise us about how he's attacking. This morning it's announced that he's seized Chernobyl, the power plant, and there's pictures of Russian soldiers, presumably also Belarusian soldiers, clad up in radioactive gear. Well, it was already figured that the quickest attack on Kiev is through Chernobyl from Belarusia. So there we are. Kiev is next in line. I wouldn't be surprised if the troops are in Kiev tomorrow. We already know from President Zelensky this evening that there are saboteurs, Russian saboteurs, already in Kiev, and there's a curfew at the moment. And Zelensky tells people to be very careful because there are dangerous opponents around Kiev, and there are still people trying to leave the city, fleeing for their life. And I know these places, I really do, and I'm heartbroken that this is happening. I find it very difficult to sleep actually at the moment. But I also know about the duplicity. I've known this for years. The duplicity, the people who say one thing and do another, and it's a particular faction in Russian society. We call them oligarchs. I have another word for them, and I flush it down the loo every time I see it. And as I say, I've come across many of them. And they all have the same. They all have the same way of way of behaving. Whether it's big or small, it's all about deceit. We say one thing, we do something else. And I'm tired of hearing the lies. I'm tired of it. I've looked the other way for quite a long time when these people have been lying their heads off. I could happily name them. They know exactly who I'm talking about as well. But this fake speak, where palaces are renamed hotels, where war is described as a special military operation, where opposition politicians are called extremists and stuck in prison, where journalists are branded foreign agents, where even their own natives, if they're saying the wrong thing, are described as foreigners and expelled from their own country. Putin is all about distorting what words mean. This is George Orwell. This is 1984. We should know about this. We invented the language that described this. This goes all the way back to Alice in Wonderland. There's a discussion about do words mean what I want them to mean, or do they mean what we understand them to mean? We can't change the meanings of words because the concept gets in the way. And when it comes to when it comes to war, Putin has claimed that only military infrastructure will be targeted. What complete balderdash! There is no military weapon that can be so strategic. We learnt last night that 137 odd people were killed and 300 odd people have died in Russia's exercise so far on the Ukrainian side. And now we find that they are in Chernobyl. And no doubt some of those Russian soldiers who've been pushed into Chernobyl will suffer as a result of being exposed to the radiation. Poor people. They have mothers, they have parents, they have families. They have no choice. And the only reason for going to war, really, is because there is a threat. And there is no threat. There has been no attack on Russia, against Russia. This is fake news. This is an invention. And I don't think Mr. Trump can be puffing out his chest at this moment, as indeed he is, because he's the person who promoted this idea of fake news. He's almost given the signal that this sort of behaviour is acceptable. It is not acceptable. Nor is it acceptable, I think, for NATO and Europe to hide behind the idea that we only go to the defence of our allies, our NATO allies. This is as fake as the idea that we actually conducted an evacuation from Kabul, and this was somehow noble. That was an act of cowardice by a despicable president. He ran away and he left the job undone. The Taliban were not a serious threat, and they have become so. And Russia looked at that and thought, here is an opportunity. And it was. It was. Putin lectures his own people about history, and they have no other source. They've become poodles to the television, and they watch those television channels and that television propaganda. And yes, there is a huge body of younger people around Moscow and St. Petersburg who read books and newspapers and think. And in the universities, the intellectuals, the elite, and yes, they are trying to protest, but I think their voices are going to be raised in vain. Putin lectures on history, and he distorts history, and he doesn't learn from history, because if he read his own history, he'd know that every time Russia has made a move against other people, it has come to regret it. You can think of the Hungarians, the Prague, every time, and more recently, the acquisition of the Crimea, the move by the Wagner troops into the Donbass region. This is what has stirred NATO and has led to NATO troops being pushed towards the border of Russian territory. There was no aggressive intention on the part of NATO. It was defensive, and it was a response to Mr. Putin's aggression. We don't seem to know how to behave. Now, as I said, I have enormous affection, and I have an enormous experience of Russia. But the Russia I know is the Russia of the Zhukov Tower, that amazing building, which has actually got a metro station named after it. So if you think of the Eiffel Tower, that's a building with a huge base. The Zhukov Tower just rises straight out of the ground. It's a marvel of mathematics and art, and it was being repaired quite recently. And there are other towers, but my university, the Moscow State Pedagogic University, has got a roof designed by Shukov. Again, a marvel of mathematics and art, and just a thrill to walk under it. And that in turn inspired the King's Cross development, and that amazing piazza that now forms part of the King's Cross station. That was inspired directly by this Russian architect Shukov at the beginning of the revolutionary period in the early 1920s. And that to me is Russia, and the wonderful way that the old buildings are sort of huddled next to these new concrete buildings, and everything is in some sort of architectural harmony. And the Russia I know is not Putin. And my heart goes out to the Russians I know, as well as to the people in the Ukraine and all my friends there. This is a disaster. It has been partly engineered by Putin and his cronies. As I say, I know the lies they tell, and I know the lies that their friends tell. They are born of lies. They continue to lie. They're never going to stop lying. It's the way they behave. Their raison d'etre. But there is a better Russia. And I'm afraid also Putin has been spurred on by the hollow, by the pussyfooting, by the cowardice, by the stupidity of the West. He thinks there's an opportunity, and I'm afraid he's right.